Hey kids, I hope you guys are having a wonderful break. So I'm just hopping on this video because I know we just finished up Civil War, but me and my husband decided to take a day trip down to Andersonville, and so I am making a video for you guys so you guys can see the historic site and learn about some stuff that maybe we didn't talk about in class, because I know we only spent like a day on it, and a lot of you guys seem super interested about Andersonville. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoy this video and you guys learn some interesting stuff about the Civil War prison, Confederate prison that was down in Georgia. So yeah. All right, so this is what the site first looks like when you walk out back from the little museum site. As you can see, it is quite a large field. Don't worry, I'll get some up close stuff of the little monuments and replicas of things for you guys. But yeah, just a reminder, Andersonville was one of the largest Confederate prisoner of war camps. As you guys remember, there were about 45,000 prisoners that came through Andersonville, and nearly 13,000 of those prisoners died from different diseases. But yeah, so let's get started. So the first stop on this tour for you guys is what is known as an earthwork defense. It is where the Confederate troops pretty much dug ditches and strategically placed cannons to kind of act as a defense mechanism for invaders that might have tried to get into the prison. I'm gonna try and get as close as possible because there are some cannons up there, but as you can see, like, there is one set of trench. Of course, erosion and the weather and all of those good things have kind of affected the way that this particular earthwork has been set up. Its originality. I'm gonna get on the grass a little bit. They do not want us on the earthwork, so I'm trying to be very respectful of their wishes. But as you can see, there's some of the cannons, and actually half of the cannons would be facing outward, so they could be used as a line of defense, and then the other half would be facing towards the prison, I guess like as an intimidation tactic for the prisoners, as well as like training. I know it doesn't really make any sense, but that's what was going on. So okay kids, so this is a replica of the stockade, which is like essentially the outside of the prison. Obviously, as you can tell from like earlier in the video, they don't have like a full enclosure, but they do have a little replica to give you an idea of what things look like. As you can see, there's these like outposts on the outside. That would be, of course, where Confederate soldiers would guard the prison from either outside attack, or also making sure that the prisoners were not causing a ruckus on the inside, giving them a advantage because of their higher up position. Now, as the Civil War went on and the fighting got closer and closer and closer within Georgia's borders, those Confederate troops that were kind of manning those posts had to go and fight with their regiments. So they would be replaced with essentially volunteers, and those volunteers would be either young boys or old men that were too old to fight. So yeah. So on the outside of the stockade, they had this little contraption that they didn't really have a sign, so I can't like for sure tell you that it was a torture device, but my best guess is that they would force them to be locked up and put their arms through those holes and then like be locked up. So yeah. So another interesting fact about these guard posts that I just found out is they are called pigeon roosts. And of course, that would be where the soldiers would, post up and guard the prisoners. But interestingly enough, sometimes local townspeople would climb up there and gawk at the prisoners. and kind of mock them. So yeah, there you go, a pigeon roost. So moving to the inside of the stockade, this is what they have set up here at Andersonville. It is kind of a replica of the conditions that the prisoners had to endure. They had to make their own shelter of whatever they had with them. Some of them were lucky enough to come with a little bit of supplies where they could have made their own tents. But then others not so much. They would use rags or pieces of clothing that they would either get off of like other soldiers or things that they had with them themselves. But as you can see, it is not a very good setup. And because of the poor conditions, living conditions that they had to endure, a lot of them, the prisoners, were coming in with injuries or suffering with sickness, and being out here in these conditions without proper shelter just kind of aggravated all of that and made the death toll rise. Like, keep in mind all the rain that we've had this week. Just think about what it would be like to have to be living in these conditions with that type of rain. Another thing that I want to address is this post right here. All right. This right here is called what they call the deadline. So when the commander of the prison that we had talked about, Henry Wirtz, came in, he set up what is called the deadline. And this deadline was literally where if any of these prisoners crossed, they would be shot. So you can see that they have their tents like set up pretty close, but there's nothing in this space. And if you look even further down, like outside the little replica, those white posts, like that is still considered the deadline. And just giving you another like look at how much space there is. Like, all of this was considered to be part of the prison. I mean, you have to think that tens of thousands of prisoners were here at one time. And it got really crowded. So I'm sure a lot of you guys are like, well, if it's so bad, why didn't they just leave or escape? There's all this land, like, it's got to be super easy to leave. And to be quite honest, they weren't really even staffed with that many Confederate soldiers. So escaping probably would have been easy, except for just the condition of the soldiers. They were not very strong. They came in weak, sick, things like that. But there were two ways that people tried to escape. One was the tunnel system. So the soldiers would dig underground tunnels and try to escape that way. No one ever escaped that way. In fact, less than 1% of soldiers in Andersonville actually successfully escaped. The ones who did successfully escaped through the while they were doing work detail, and they just kind of ran away. But they would have hounds that would go and chase after them. It wasn't as easy to escape as you think that it would be. And because of that, because of the tunnel system that they created, there are tunnels all throughout these grounds here. Underground tunnels and wells, because of all of the digging that they did to try and escape. And as you guys can kind of see here, like, this is one site of a possible tunnel, or at least the start of a tunnel. And of course, over the years, it doesn't look the same as it did when it was started. So, but yeah. So this area right over here, as you can see, there's a lot of monuments over here. And these monuments, for the most part, not all of them, but most of them, actually are monuments that have been commemorated by states. So this one right here is Ohio. This one right here over here is Michigan. There's one over there for Wisconsin and Rhode Island. So what would happen is these soldiers that would become in prison, they would set up camp by state. And it was kind of to help boost morale and keep everybody thinking positive. I mean, I know nobody wants to think positive when they're imprisoned and being treated like garbage, but that positive mindset is so important to survival. If you give in to the idea that you're going to die and that things are awful and that this is the worst time of your life, it is not going to help you survive. So yeah, it's just super neat to have all these states kind of come together and donate these commemorative monuments for the soldiers that have passed away from their state. Some of them actually have names of the soldiers on there. But yeah, kind of cool. So this right here is obviously the front gates. This is where the prisoners would enter. As you can see, there's some pigeon roosts, guard posts up there. So here we have an example of kind of their water system here. Water was very, very, very scarce. All they had was this like trickle little spring that was disgusting because of from where the water came from. It had actually passed through just dead bodies and people going to the bathroom. You get the picture. All right, so like the water did not make the conditions any better. But in 1864 there was this huge rainstorm that erupted this spring, and many of the soldiers felt like it was an answer to their prayers because it provided fresh water for them, which led a lot of them able to survive. Now, you cannot drink this water. All right, there's even a sign I'm going to show you that says, "Water unfit for human consumption, please do not drink." But of course, desperate times call for desperate measures, and when you are a prisoner and you have no food or water, you're going to drink what's available to you. So we're standing here at the back stockade. And I just wanted to stop so you guys can get a glimpse. So this is basically the back of the prison. All right, I showed you the monument up there in the corner up there is where I showed you the tents. So that gives you an idea of actually how big the prison was. All these posts, those posts right there represent the deadline. That these posts right here, that represents the stockade. So just think about that. Tens of thousands of soldiers were crammed in this area. So this ground right here is what is known as the Star Fort. This is where Commander Wirtz would have stayed. The Confederate soldiers that were helping run the prison, they would have been, when they were off duty, they would have been away from the conditions of the prison. Now, what a lot of people think is that the soldiers were treated poorly and they didn't have any supplies or rations because the Confederate soldiers essentially took them all. That's not true. The Confederate soldiers were actually dealing with the exact same conditions as the prisoners were. Lack of food, lack of water, lack of supplies. And it only gets worse as time goes on with the prison. Because like we talked about with Sherman's Atlanta campaign in March to the Sea, he destroyed their railroad lines through Georgia. And of course that is one of the major ways that these troops were to have gotten supplies and food and all that good stuff. And when that got destroyed, the conditions of the camp worsened. But as you can see, there are some cannons here, which I'm sure a lot of you are like interested in. All right, get a close up. Of course, it looks like they've enclosed that right there. But yeah, and then of course from here you can see the prison. All right, so this blank open field here is where the prison hospital was. Surprisingly, not a lot of people wanted to go to the prison hospital, because if you went to the prison hospital, there was a good chance that you were not going to return. There wasn't a lot of supplies, so it's not like you were going to go there and get really good medical attention. Even the sickest men didn't really want to go, because they'd rather die among their friends and comrades than alone in the hospital. Hey guys, so this is going to be the last part of the tour, and the last part of the tour at Andersonville is the cemetery. As you guys know, almost over 13,000 Union soldiers and prisoners of war died while at Andersonville. And I'm going to give you guys some footage of the actual cemetery. You can see some of the stones behind me. But the death toll got so incredibly bad. It had gotten to a point where 100 soldiers a day were dying due to these conditions. So as we walk around, I'm going to show you some footage of the cemetery. If some interesting things pop up, I will definitely show you guys as far as like monuments and things, but this is a sacred place, and I don't necessarily want to be disrespectful while filming or explaining to you guys. It is a very important part of history, and a very neat experience that I want to give you guys via video, but I also want to make sure that I'm doing it in a very respectful way. So stay tuned. As you can see, there are a ton of graves, and they had to be so close together because of how many there were. These 6 graves right here, we are going to talk about those in just a second. Alright, so these 6 graves behind me represent the leaders of the prison gang that was created down in Andersonville, the Raiders. So obviously Andersonville was a rough spot to be in anyway, but there were prison gangs that were created to help with survival. And it got so bad that the other prisoners kind of created this police force to try and steer them away and keep everybody safe. But things kind of got out of hand, and the commander of the prison, Henry Wirtz, he decided to make an example of the leaders of the Raiders, and they actually tried them, found them guilty of several heinous crimes, and then hung them. And these are their 6 graves, so they are set apart from everybody else for that reason, so that they are not lumped in with everybody else, because I mean, they were doing bad stuff in prison too. So I'm gonna leave you guys with this last little factoid about the cemetery. So as you can see, all the headstones behind me are marble, but that wasn't always the case. They were originally wooden. They were photographed in 1867, and they were started to be replaced in 1878 with marble headstones. And part of that was due to the efforts of a woman named Clara Barton. If that name sounds familiar to you, that is because that is the same woman who founded the Red Cross. But apparently there was a list that had been kept of the deceased at Andersonville, and that list corresponded with the wooden markers. And so as they went through this list, they made sure to put the marble headstones in every single exact spot that corresponded with this list of the deceased from Andersonville. So there is so much to see here. I know it doesn't seem like it, but because of the open fields and stuff like that, but there is a lot of interesting and rich history here. So if you ever get a chance to come down to Andersonville, I highly recommend it. There is a prisoner of war museum also attached, which talks about prisoners of war, not necessarily just with Andersonville, but throughout the United States war history in general. It's just a super cool place. It's not too terribly far, and it's free. So, you know, yeah, free is good. But yeah, I hope you guys have enjoyed this nice little tour of Andersonville. And yeah, I'll see you guys at school.